You take a pro-life position. What kind of what kind of policy would you like to see enacted regarding abortion, and enacted federally, on a state level, both? Just in general, what are you looking for there?
Well, I consider abortion an act of violence, and violence is one thing the government has a responsibility to curtail. But for the most part, all acts of violence are handled by state law. You know, murder and manslaughter and accidents and all kinds of things. All criminal activity, crime, robbery. So therefore, I think they should deal with this issue. And it's a more difficult issue than just plain murder. And therefore, it should be worked out at the state level. So I don't want the federal government to do it. The federal government should never tax one person, which is really a pretty vicious violation of a right to life individuals to take their money and give it to a hospital that's committing abortions. You know, that's why people get very worked up over this. So we shouldn't be providing any funding whatsoever. There's one thing the federal government could do to move in the direction I want, and that is to move in the direction of a bill that I have called We the People's Act. You just remove it from the jurisdiction of the courts. You don't need a constitutional amendment. You don't need to wait for Supreme Court justices. It's interesting that many of the right-to-life groups have not, particularly given me support for that position. They argue we have to change the Supreme Court, we have to have a constitutional amendment. But they could, in the meantime, say, well, let's just remove jurisdiction. And if New Hampshire decided to be more restrictive on abortion, they could. They could prohibit it. They could just make it more restrictive, and lives could have been saved. But for some reason, the Right to Life movement generally doesn't get behind that movement. They just sort of allow this thing to linger and on and fight for constitutional amendments, and how long are you going to wait for Supreme Court justices to rule a certain way, and besides, they're not obligated after they're in office anyway. So I don't like that approach. I think the limitation of jurisdiction should be the way to go, and you could do that for other things too, like for marriage and prayer in school. Let the states assume this responsibility the way it was supposed to be.
Can I add something to that? So let's go back to the fact that it's up to the states. But if you consider it an act of violence, and in that way you're saying treat it like a criminal act, I would suppose you're saying. So who would you prosecute, the woman having the abortion or the people giving the abortions? I mean, you're going to throw pregnant women in jail?
I'm not going to be in that determination as a federal official.
You're a congressman of a state. If that were your state, what would you do? Throw the woman in jail or the doctors?
No, I don't have a simple answer for that, because I think it's very, very difficult. Nobody has an easy answer for that, because in spite of the fact that I believe that life begins at conception, and that anything I do to the unborn as a physician, I can be sued for. So we know it's a legal entity. Or if there's an accident, you're liable for killing a fetus and killing an unborn. So I would say that it's going to vary. If somebody takes, I don't think there's any way you can legislate against taking the day after pill, because you can't prove there was a crime. You can't even prove there was a pregnancy. So legally and biologically, you can't prove it. So you certainly would have a different penalty for that than what if somebody is 9 months pregnant, has an 8-pound baby, and her boyfriend left her. She says, I don't want this baby. And she goes to the doctor and gets paid money for this and aborts and kills the baby.
8-month abortions? I don't.
Sure, they're legal.
Yeah, but it doesn't. How often does that happen?
But the principle is 100%. So you can't avoid that by saying, oh, well, yeah, early abortion's okay, but not in the third trimester. Third trimester, they're legal. Maybe it's only 4 pounds. The principle is there. Roe versus Wade legalized it in the third trimester. So the principle is there. So are you going to do it? Or should you have a law and say, oh, no, don't do it? The court said you can. But hopefully even the abortionists wouldn't be so unethical as to do something as horrible as that, and yet under the law they could do it.
I just don't think that really ever happens, but thank you.
Well, have you ever heard of partial birth abortion?
Yeah, but 8-month fetuses.
Well, what about 7 months? What about 6 months? What about 5 months? We can save a baby weighing 1 pound. We can save a baby at 1 pound. And unfortunately, it does exist, but the principle is very important if you don't have an understanding. But this whole idea that, one time a doctor did an abortion and the baby was born alive. So he drowned the baby. He got arrested for murder. He was convicted, not in prison or anything, but he was convicted of a crime. What about the young girl who delivers a baby and drops it off and the baby dies? She can be arrested, and is. But before the baby was born, I could be paid to do it, whether it was at 2, 3, or 4, or 5, or 6 pounds. You can't say the argument, well, they're not going to do it at 8 pounds. Well, probably not. But the principle is established there. It's an important issue on what life is all about. This has nothing to do with privacy. This has to do with what is the responsibility of the government to protecting all life and defining life.
Well, your proposed legislative approach, which would remove the jurisdiction of the courts, aren't you concerned that any legislative remedy could ultimately be overturned by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional itself?
On certain things, I guess that's the case, but the Congress is supposed to act wisely, remove the jurisdiction on only the things that are popularly supported. If they started removing, matter of fact, I think in one of these anti-privacy bills, the bill, said that the Supreme Court couldn't rule on that. And they were using it in the opposite way, what you're suggesting. Can't remember, it was the Patriot Act or the FISA courts or something that was a violation of civil liberties by the federal government. And then saying that I guess it was these secret prisons and habeas corpus, that you don't have the right to go to the federal court. Yeah, that is a danger. And that's why you have to do it with some common sense. But for us to write that into the law and say that, and I'd have to argue, they had the authority to do that. But boy, that is horrendous abuse. I mean, that's really violating the whole concept of the government protecting our privacy and our rights.